Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Contract, a Commander podcast. I'm Mike Almond, and joining me is my co-host, Alex Lapp. Alex! What's up, man?
Not too much, Mike. And how are you doing today?
We're good.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled. We're finally gonna do it, man. What are we doing? We're solving EDH power level. We've got it. Definitive. It's here. There's a chart. There's graphs. It's perfect. So don't worry about it anymore, anybody. We got it. We've got it taken care of. Or at least, like, kind of.
Yeah. I think that anyone who's been around the EDH scene for more than a couple of years has probably, if not seen a wealth of different attempts at power scales, have at least heard of the concept of a power scale, or at least heard of Jason Alt's infamous 75% theory, heard of the 1 to 10 power scale, seen
Lasagna
probably your favorite
more.
Content creator has probably come up with one. And today we will not be coming up with one of our own. Because that would be entirely too ambitious.
I
think there's definitely a conversation that we'll have after this about the efficacy of this power scale and whether indeed power scales are a problem that can be easily solved. But I saw this one the other month, and I was immediately intrigued. Let's start with who this is from here.
Credit where credit is due.
This is from Beebles on TappedOut, and the name of this scale is called the EDH Multiverse. It's a model of the EDH landscape, and if you're watching on YouTube, or if you are at a computer, then being able to see what we're looking at is probably going to be helpful, but we're going to be with you every step of the way here. Let's start before this, though. What is a power scale? Why is it important? Why are we going to dedicate an entire episode here to a new power scale? What's going on here? I think most of our listeners probably know, Mike, that power scale, we're talking about how strong the deck is. That's basically what we're trying to go for. How fast does it win? How resilient is it? How mean is it? What can it do by itself? What can it do to when other decks are trying to interrupt it? Things like that. There's a lot of different aspects that go into it, but it's more of a idea that people hold in their heads than a scientific, like, oh, well, I put my deck in the power algorithm and it came out to be a 5.4. That has never existed. Although we did, incidentally,
I was gonna say,
we did create
April 1st.
an April 1st, April Fool's joke power scale where you could, on EDH Rec, where you could put in your deck list and it would, churn for a bit and it would pump out a 7, but it was always a 7. Very funny joke, because I think in general, in school certainly, and in film reviews and anything, 7 is perceived to be average, and I think that a lot of people will say that their deck is at or around a 7, which kind of really squeezes the scale, right? Doesn't it? So that anything above average, you only have 8, 9, and 10, and a lot of people say that 9 and 10 are only for CDH. And then for the lower end of the scale, you have all these numbers, 1 through 6. And do you really even need that many numbers to describe various amounts of bad? It's just, it hasn't been a very easy thing to define. So a lot of different content creators, I know Channel Fireball did one. I know the Command Zone has done one. I think
we're going to do one. It's just that ours is going to be like 4 minutes long, as far as what the power scale is, because it'll be like, wow, that's way too strong. The tier below that will be strunk. Tier below that, you know what I mean? Like, we'll make one, but I like. And here's the thing: you even in kind of going into the preamble of power scale, right? This is basically what power scale is. You said things like, how fast does it win? Mm-hmm. How powerful is it? How does it interact? All these other things, and there are 10 other things that you and I wouldn't think about, that a lot of other players would. And there's a bunch of stuff that you and I definitely think about.
Yeah.
Because we're also leaning on the, hey, how much interaction do you do as a player?
Right.
Like as a individual with everybody else at the table. Less, interaction on the actual battlefield definitely matters. But like, how much do you actually talk with people in this? Or is this like a, no, turns 1 and 2 are where I'm going to win the game, or at least get close to winning the game, which means I am not interacting, I'm just going. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, and I kind of like this, again, the EDH metaverse, as far as hey, here's an interpretation of the format, and what would you like to play in it? And it is... you mentioned before, we're gonna put a link in our actual show notes for people listening on the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you're gonna see the entire thing, and we'll be highlighting areas as we go. If you're not watching on YouTube, you might have. If there was an episode to pick,
we're going to do our best here, but there is a visual component to this power scale that we're going to do our best to approximate. But I think that the best experience to following along is going to at least to have a picture of what we're looking at pulled up here, because the most important aspect that differentiates this power scale from other power scales is that this is a two-dimensional scale.
Yeah, and we'll try and give kind of a recap regardless as we're finishing each topic. So, like most graphs, do you want to start on the x-axis or the y-axis here?
Yeah, so let's first talk abstract, right? So
Perfect.
We're talking about a two-dimensional chart, which means we have two different axes of power that we're measuring against. We have one axis that's is about interaction impact, like how much can people do to your deck before it's starting to have trouble, before its win con is not possible to reach, alternate win cons, things like that. And then we have the usual scale that people are talking about, the actual power level, how fast are we going, things like that. And so we have those along two different axes here, and naturally that's going to plot out this grid, and the creator Beebles has sort of created these zones of sort of families of decks that fall along this scale. For example, in the casual EDH section they have walled off, it's on the low end of interaction impacts and the low end of power. And then exactly the opposite has along the high end of power, we have CDH, and in between we have high power casual and tolerant casual. We'll get into all of that, but let's start first and foremost by starting with what's familiar. Let's start with the power scale that Beebles has set out here in the EDH multiverse. Let's start with the fun one right here at the bottom. Levels 1 and 2, Mike, not for power jank decks. Mike, talk to us about jank.
So, not for power, jank decks. I love the overall synopsis of this, because jank is in my realm.
Yeah.
Jank is jank. I want to play things that people don't see.
Yeah.
We literally have a segment, ooh, can I see that? Where it's not about being the most powerful card that no one's ever heard of. It's about being a card that when you play it in this deck, no one's ever heard of it, and it's really cool in that deck, right?
Yeah.
So, that said, not for power, jank decks, 1 star out of 5 as far as, the raising of the power level here. Built to achieve an alternate goal at the cost of being able to win, or built without much understanding of what is required to win EDH games. Now, I like that it is an or, like comma or. So
because you can make a jank deck on purpose, and indeed you do.
Right. Yes. Yeah. In fact, for a friend's birthday gift, I am going to make them a commander deck that is Volo. That's all about like the having different creature types. But I'm going to try and use the rarest of creature types, like there's 3 of these in the game.
Oh, you mean like Feldegriff?
Yeah. Yeah. But, different colors, because Volo, I wish it had more colors.
Yeah.
But that's the plan with that deck, right? And why maybe that thing can win every once in a while. But the whole reason I'm building it is I want to have this weird encyclopedia of the weirdest creature types in Magic.
Of course. Zubera.
And that's the point of the deck. Yeah. That's the point of the deck, right? So it's not built because I don't know how Magic works.
Mike, don't you know how Magic works? You have to build a deck that's good. What's wrong with you?
Oh boy. We're gonna have to cancel the podcast. But the point is, wins are rare and are usually made possible by actions of other players, right? So maybe you can win with this deck, but it's not necessarily built to do that. In fact, it's not being built to do that. The alternate goal as the cost of being able to win.
Right.
And if it does win, usually it requires some help.
And we have an extended explanation here. It says expect decks that do something different than win. Can include quirky jank builds, such as Ladies Looking Left, classic. Certain Vorthos decks, which means lore-based decks. Some Group Hug and Chaos decks.
I appreciate the sum.
The Group Hug decks that we make are not down here, largely.
No, for the most part.
Yeah. Decks that seek to end games in a tie. Suicide decks. Decks that are made by newcomers with limited access to the card pool, limited budget, and limited knowledge of the format. That's what's important here, right? You have the brand new players who are taking their first crack at building a deck, but they're not neck decking, so it might be, not very synergistic. It might be having some bad synergy, some trouble with the actual deck building process. Alternatively, you have very silly people like Mike and myself. Now, I personally don't have any decks in this range, but I could definitely see that happening. And it, like Mike said, it's not because you don't know what you're doing. It's because you do know what you're doing and you're doing it wrong on purpose. Right. You want a silly deck. That's what this is for.
Exactly. And again, this is in the lowest tier as far as like overall power. But I do like that it's not just like low power / play to win. It's play to socialize and play to win. Right? This is more about, I want to make this deck, I want to do this specific thing, or I want to make something that is built around this theme, etc.
Right.
Cool.
And then on a different axis, but at the same power level, now we have the interaction axis. And what does that mean if you have a low power level on that axis? No impact lenient decks. It says it will allow its opponents to advance their game plan uninterrupted most of the time, and relies on other players to deal with problems. Right. That makes a lot of sense. If you're building a janky deck or a lore deck, or you're a new player building a deck, you're probably not necessarily including a lot of removal and board wipes, counter magic, things that stop other people from winning the game, because those are very directed things that are planned. Now, maybe your Vorthos deck, might just necessarily happen to include, a counter spell that's tribal or something like that. Sure. But it's not going to be running a counter spell package is the important, or removal package. And then down it says, what can I expect at this interaction impact at this low power level? Expect to receive little resistance from this deck. Most cards are used for helping this deck do its own thing. Think less than 5 slots for interaction, i.e. single target removal, board wipes, protection counter spells, or other effects that stop an opponent's actions. Yeah, so janky decks and new players' decks usually aren't including a lot of interaction. Although, as we move up the scale here, I think it's important to keep in mind that just because a deck doesn't have a lot of interaction doesn't necessarily mean it's jank, because when it's time for me to do the thing that we all do, and maybe we'll talk about this another time, intentionally powering down your deck. I'm sure we have an episode about this. One of the things that I'll do to power my deck down is not necessarily make it less powerful, but I'll make it more fragile, right? Okay. It's more difficult for me to stop other people, and it's easier for other people to stop me. That's simply by removing interaction. And you don't want to necessarily remove too much, but if you remove a little bit, then that can weaken the deck a bit. It makes it so you don't necessarily have the answer for everything, which, it makes the deck less synergistic and weaker. And sometimes that's what you want.
Part of the reason that I was excited about you sending this chart into the Discord and then to have this conversation about it for the podcast is because I looked here, and first of all, we'll get into the middle tier of, more of the, here are the different breakdowns of where your numbers are, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I really enjoyed is I went, my power level, according to this chart, is higher than I thought.
Yes.
but my interaction impact is way lower.
Right.
And it put me in this weird tier for a lot of my different decks. Like, I don't have
like, is this
any
a 6?
tanks.
What is this? Like,
yeah, I like, you know what I mean? And I kind of liked it because I love the idea of like, hey, there's casual EDH. There's casual EDH and regular EDH, and then there's CEDH. And it's like, well, no, it's not. Because think about that.
Yeah, there's
Otherwise,
more. Yeah.
Yeah, if that was the only 2 power levels, if those were the only 2 tiers in the format, then there wouldn't need to be a power level discussion. It's just, are you playing CEDH or EDH?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, we're all doing that too. Yeah, go ahead and play that deck. But let's move on to our next number here. Those
right.
were both kind of our 1-2 range on everything. Why don't you help me out with our next in the power?
Okay, so back to the power scale, and I realize this may be confusing. We're switching between the axes, but I thought that it might work a little better if we talk about what's low power, what's low interaction, and what's medium power, medium interaction. So here's low power basic decks. This is decks that are in a 3 to 4 in the power scale according to this. Winning likely remains the intent when playing, but it wasn't the main goal when building this deck. Threatening a win independently is not something this deck will do reliably. Knocking out opponents will usually happen one player at a time. And then the description says here, we're going to expect decks with obvious limitations, such as intentional power constraints, that's important, a small existing card pool, lower budget, or relatively low effort or knowledge. May include a combination of different unaligned ideas on how to win, thinking about old precons. Includes most precons and decks built around achievement type win cons. Exactly.
Yeah.
So achievement type win cons, that's interesting because Mike, you've talked about this idea of not necessarily winning the game, but what I want to do with this deck is get 30 creatures on the board. And for me, that's my goal.
Yeah. Like the idea of I just want to swing with this creature one time and make it do the crazy thing.
Right.
And then maybe that's something that I win the game with. Or maybe it's something where I do that and then you wipe the board. But that's okay. I still won. I still got to do my thing.
Sure.
The idea of knocking out opponents will usually happen one player at a time as opposed to this big alpha striker combo off kind of thing. I'm glad that you read that out because I was going to say, I think most precons are in kind of this, as far as power, the number that it's going to be given, according to this chart, is like a 3-4 range, right?
Precons have been getting a lot more powerful recently. But I think that especially prior to 2020 and I'm thinking back to like 2018, 2017, 2016 and before, a lot of those decks, it's not necessarily that they're weak, it's that they almost built it in a way that I would describe as bad because they have 3 different face commanders and they've sort of put 1/3 of a deck for each of the commanders so that and since the commanders don't necessarily synergize, the strategies don't either. So it's almost like they built you 1/3 of 3 different decks and put them all together. And this results in a very not synergistic deck that needs a lot of cards to be swapped out to become decent. And I think that as time has gone on, they've really honed in on a specific strategy. And just that change alone has dramatically increased the power level past 3, which is what I think most of these old ones were at.
Which makes sense because, as a format grows to the point where instead of releasing, a commander deck set once a year, now they're doing it once a set.
Yeah, can you believe we used to have 1 set of commander decks a year and now we have like 50?
Right. Yeah. And that combination of doing that and then also having more cards specifically designed for the format, which means that there's, that thought process means that by default, the deck building composition that you would have for, we're going to do our decks this year or for this set, there's going to be more process because there's more cards that are specifically built into it. There's more thought that's put into it. So technically, if you're putting that much more effort into it, unless you're doing your best to lower the power to a certain point, it's going to be more powerful than the things before it that you weren't really thinking.
Just by building with synergy, even if you're not trying to make it powerful, by its own nature, powerful things will start to happen.
Yeah, that's synergy. Exactly.
Yeah, synergy. So talk to me about what's tier 2 of interaction impact, Mike?
Exactly. So low impact reactive decks. Okay, so there is some interaction included mainly for dealing with emergencies reactively. Right. This is the I'm going to have a couple of cards that say, "Oh nope, this is bad," kind of fix, as opposed to anything further. Can incidentally bring the winning player back in check. Right. This isn't having a deck full of silver bullets. This is having one or two or a couple that are there specifically for, oh, no, that can't happen. But just that, right? And for the what can I expect at this interaction impact? Expect decks that will slow you down when you become the obvious threat. Being able to answer other players is valued, but the availability of interaction is not a priority. Think up to 10 slots and or mainly pieces of sorcery speed and higher CMC.
Which is, it's funny that it names a number of slots because I think you and I both listen to a lot of Commander content. And as the years have gone on, the number of interaction slots that these content creators have been recommending has steadily risen to the point where I personally would think that 10 interaction is a very healthy amount. Like, that's a lot of interaction.
I don't know that I have a deck that has 10 or more.
Right. My Stacks deck has that much.
Right. But that's what it's built to
most
do,
of my decks don't have anywhere near that because that's, what would you say? That's like 3, 4, 5 board wipes. And then you have, I mean, most decks are not going to have both spot removal and counter magic, or at least a lot of both.
Right.
So, having 10, so 5 spot removal, 5 board wipes, or some combination of counter spells in there, that's a lot of interaction in my mind personally. So it's really interesting to see that's, if you only have 10 spells for stopping people or protecting your board state, to me, that's a really healthy package. So that's interesting to see it that low.
I do like the think up to and or.
Right.
So it is like, hey, that's this number max, and it's mainly pieces that are sorcery speed, higher CMC, stuff like that. Like not the low to the ground super efficient removal. It's the I kind of like the ones that I had in this place were, I have to stop this player from winning. All right, I have like a counter spell. I have I have a path. I have a couple of things. And if you're in that couple of this is the only way I can deal with this things, or I have to stop this now, otherwise the game's over, I get that. And I like the low impact reactive. There's some, right? Emergencies, dealing with those reactively. I like it. What do you got for me when we get to where everybody thinks they are? Everybody thinks they're at the mid-level on everything, right? So our 5-6 range.
So let's bump this up to mid-power focus decks. What this deck does to win is a lot more important than how efficient it is at doing it. Win strategies are very clear, but either not the most powerful nor the most optimized. When it threatens a win, it's usually between turns 8 and 12, and or controlling decks at that speed. And that clause there at the end is to cover Stacks decks, right? Yep. Where Stacks decks won't necessarily win by turn 8 or 12, but they will be locking decks out that are able to win by turn 8 or 12, and then they themselves will, grind the game to a halt, win by turn 15, whatever it is. Expect synergistic decks with a clear plan or theme, but also a considerable degree of variance. Right, that's important. Not necessarily a lot of tutors. Can include a lot of different types of decks, including mid-power commanders, more laid-back build higher-power commanders, and highly tuned low-power commanders. It can include less efficient combos that require 3 cards or more.
Less efficient infinite combos. I want to make sure that
less efficient infinite combos. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're entering the range where infinite combos it's at least entered the conversation, right?
Right.
But we're not going with the immediate Deadeye Navigator and insert blank. We're talking multiple cards, not efficient, but can do the thing.
Right. We've talked about this concept before of valuing out, which is a finite combo that kind of might show up just serendipitously. Once you have 5, 6, 7 pieces on the board, you might notice this triggers this, and this triggers this, and this triggers this, and suddenly 200 things have happened, but trying to assemble that combo on purpose would be almost unfeasible. It just kind of happened because your deck is so synergistic.
That makes sense. I like that. Why don't you lean us into the impact then?
Yeah.
The interaction.
So what about interaction impact at this middle tier, 5 and 6? Mid-impact balancing decks, interaction is still mainly reactive, but is available more often, can bring balance to the table, but will not lock down other players. It says expect decks that can really set you back a few times during the course of the game. Likely has more of a mix of instant sorceries and different mana values among its interaction pieces, and has ways to protect against the interaction of others becoming more common, up to 15 slots. Now, it's so funny that I'm completely on board for all of this, and then we get to up to 15 slots. To me, if your deck is running 15 slots of interaction, you are way above a 5 on the interaction table. That's like...
Sure.
I just can't... It's so strange to me.
I like the combo.
Yes.
I like the combo of the everything else. Hey, this is... I like it as kind of a check and balance on your own self-evaluation, right? So if I've got 7 things that are interaction from my deck, right? But they're all really high power, right? We're talking the 0 mana counter spells and, things along those lines. If they're all really high power, just because I have fewer of those things than some others, what I'm putting in there is still pretty powerful. So I like that there is kind of a combination of the two. But I again, we're kind of coming from it at the opposite end of the spectrum here, because you have, a couple decks at maximum, one deck that I can think of where you're higher than a few interactive pieces.
Yeah, I mean... I think that my deck almost certainly has more than 15 pieces of interaction, but that's really the only
That's
one.
What it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I get it. It does make me... It does make the hair on my neck stand up just a little bit
fast,
as we talk about
you just imagine my deck's a 5. It's got 15 counter spells.
Right.
I'm sorry? Your deck's a 5 and it has 15 counter spells?
Well, here's the thing. That fits on this chart.
Apparently.
and that's kind of why I like it, because it's a, hey, there's there's more than 2 different types of ways to evaluate a deck, right? As opposed to just power level, how far does the deck go to for a win, and interaction, how far does the deck go to stop others from winning. There's more than that. But if you just dial it down to those 2 main factors, yeah, you can absolutely be a control deck that runs, and we'll talk about all the stops in a little bit as far as interaction, but it can be a janky, not for power deck that doesn't really do stuff. And then we'll get to that in the future here. But yeah, we're at the mid-tier point. We're exiting out of the standard casual EDH, tolerant casual EDH decks and leaning into the high power casual. And with that, let's go right into high power optimized decks. So mainly built to win reliably, but there were also other drivers when building this deck. Win cons that defeat all opponents at once are common, can threaten a win independently between turns 4 and 8 most of the time, and or is built to win by controlling decks of that speed. So that's when we're talking about the power level. What can I expect at this power level? Expect decks that are highly synergistic and that are built to win reliably. Includes higher power win strategies that fall short of the top winning power. Can also include CEDH viable commanders built with a more casual mindset or on a lower budget, as well as fully optimized mid-power ones built with a lot of budget and effort. So everybody... we've already discussed the joke when we're talking about what's your deck's power level. Oh, it's a 7, right?
Yeah.
So if a 7 is that, it's built to win reliably. There's a lot of win cons that can defeat everybody at once. Turns 4 to 8 independently are kind of where you want to be at for your win. And it can include, some CEDH level commanders that are toned down a little bit. It can also include casual commanders that are toned up a little bit. As far as a power level, I think that would be surprising to people to hear that, like, hey, my deck's a 7. Okay, cool.
So that you win by turn 8?
Yeah, it's
like,
can
what?
you win
No.
by turn 8?
What? No.
Can you win by turn 8? Can you win by turn 4? Right? Because that's where we're in. So I think it makes sense that at this point, 7 is kind of the high power.
That does make sense,
I
right?
love that phrase.
What I was talking about earlier is it makes no sense for the average to be at 7, because then you have 1 through 6, just all this free open space to talk about various kinds of jank, which makes just no sense at all.
Well, you've discussed it before. You know, the grading system where, hey, if you get a C is average.
Right.
Because you're 70%, well, that's not average. That's average above failing.
Yeah.
So, fair enough. But we're also in a format where, hey, if you're playing a deck that's a 5, it's not failing. Because you are specifically building it to do something around a 5 or lower. A mid-power or limited interaction or a jank deck that wants to do something cool. Like have all of your cards have chairs in them.
I think by this metric, I probably have a couple of 5 decks. But if I said there were 5 decks, and I brought them out, people would be like, what the hell? That's not a 5 deck.
That's not a 5.
You're that's like a 7. 6. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like, hey, and that's where you pull out this chart. That's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to turn this chart into a playmat.
Oh, Jesus.
And then I'm just going to put it on the table. And I'm going to be like, okay, cool. Tell me where you're at. That's how I'm going to interact with people. In the meantime, what is the interaction impact for high?
Yeah, so if we're looking at high impact resistant decks, they proactively seek to prevent problems through denial and or has answers up more often than not, sometimes locks other players down temporarily. That's starting to sound like a control stacks deck proper.
Yeah.
What can I expect at this interaction level? Expect decks that can give you a very hard time. Instant speed and low CMC interaction is prioritized and has pieces of higher impact such as silver bullets or others that deny access to your commander. Can include strategies such as taxes, turbo fog, and steel decks up to 20 interaction slots. Right, so I think this is where my stacks deck sits because it's a silver bullet stacks deck. It's definitely running 20 or more pieces of interaction because that's the main goal of the deck. And it is specifically designed to lock other players out, specifically one player out at a time, and deny access to strategies, deny access to the commander.
Right. Taxes, lots of fogs, lots of you're trying to win con denial.
Yes.
Without locking out playing the game all at once.
Yes.
It's a lot of low speed interaction. I love the idea. The first sentence, it just expect decks that can give you a very hard time.
Right. I think this would also cover a lot of other stacks decks, but without necessarily the most oppressive pieces. Like it might be running a lot of tax effects, but it wouldn't necessarily run, say, cards like Stasis.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of pieces that low instant speed and low CMC interaction is prioritized, right?
Yeah, because you need a wide variety of cards to be able to lock down specific situations.
Right.
Yeah.
But when it's prioritized, it doesn't mean it's all it's ever going to be.
Right.
It means that you're definitely leaning that way, but there's still room. Right.
It's also a token deck, for example. All of my decks turn into token decks.
Yeah, it's fair.
How does it happen?
Is there anything better than just like, I'm going to cast some spells, and now I need 45 individual cards to put onto the table?
So that we covered casual ADH, which it says is going from 9 to 12. That was powers 1 through 6. We just went through most of high power casual and tolerant casual ADH, which is turns 5 through 8, it says. Now we're going to get into CEDH.
Yeah. And real quick.
Yeah.
One more thing about this graph in the middle here and everything. I love the fact that like the way that the boxes are drawn as far as outlining where things are.
It's in between.
It's like, it's in between. So like casual EDH, just by itself, turns everybody has room to try out their stuff. Turns 9 to 12. Yeah, it's like 5.4, 5.5, and then you get into high power casual EDH, which is like, we're leaning into 5.5 to like a 7.5, and then you get into your CEDH, which is a little bit lower than 8 and above, right? So there is a little bit of wiggle room in there, which is smart because power level.
It's
speaking of,
I mean, this is a problem in general with the power scale, right? Is that almost all of them, this one included, reserve power levels 9 and 10 for CEDH, which personally I believe, and I believe a lot of other people might implicitly agree, is effectively a separate format. Nobody would ever, in good conscience, play a CEDH deck at a casual EDH table. Nobody would think that they could bring their casual EDH deck to a CDH table and have a chance. They're just completely different games with the same rules.
As long as people are categorizing EDH into a wide variety of different tiers, right?
Right.
But if it's just, I have a CEDH deck or I just have a casual deck, and then you sit down and people are like, wait, that's way too powerful for a casual deck. It doesn't mean you're playing CDH, but as far as everybody else is concerned at that table, maybe you are.
That's what I'm saying. Like 9 and 10, I think, should be the pub stomp EDH levels. Like, we don't need level 9 and 10 for CEDH because CEDH has their own power scale.
It is CEDH.
They have an entirely own, like, they have tier 0, 1, 2, and 3. And all of their format is almost, I mean, I won't say solved, but solved. They don't need 9 and 10 from us at the casual side. They have their own stuff. So I don't necessarily agree in general with this power scale and other power scales where like, oh, well, CDH can be 9 and 10. CDH is not on this scale. They have a separate other scale that starts after 10 for casual.
Again, I get where you're coming from. I think I slightly disagree just because it goes from like, hey, here's a casual EDH, here's a high power casual EDH. Mm-hmm. Like, there isn't just a, 2-tier system as far as it's concerned.
I think there really is, though, because it's about those goals, right? Like, even a pub stomp EDH deck is not, like, that couldn't sit at a CDH deck. It just can't. Because CDH decks are so solved. They have specific commanders that they understand the strategies for. They have specific cards that they run. I mean, the idea of complaining about a CDH deck being net decked makes no sense to CDH players because you're just running the deck list. That's what it is. And you can change it a bit, but it's like a competitive format. Other people have done a lot of research and a lot of work to find what can win the game in 0 to 4 turns. And ostensibly you could find something that would be able to do that out of the blue, but I just don't know, Mike.
How about this? How about we finish out
let's do
the last power level where we're talking about 9s and 10s here.
Yeah.
And then we look at some of our decks and we see where we're at. Because I'm with you, but I also know that I've got some decks that are probably leaning into the 9 to 10 power level here.
Right.
Based off of the actual explanation. But I also wouldn't call them a CEDH deck either.
Right.
But that's also because my interaction is a lot lower. So, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But speaking of power, so all power, 9 to 10 competitive decks, built to win reliably without compromise. Win conditions defeat all opponents at once, include the fastest, most effective, and most resilient strategies in the format, can reliably threaten a win independently on turn 4 or earlier, and or is built to win reliably by reliably controlling decks of that speed.
Right.
You can expect decks that are pushed to the absolute power limit of the format. Includes fully optimized builds of the best commanders, strategies, and win cons, such as the most effective infinite combos in the game, as well as many ways to reach those win cons fast and reliably. Also includes the most powerful control decks such as CEDH Sax builds. I'm actually going to take back what I said before. I don't have a deck in this power level.
Yeah, I definitely don't have any decks in this power level. I don't have a single deck that can win by turn 4 or earlier. Even my Stacks deck, which I consider to be quite powerful, there is absolutely no way, and I know because I've tried, it simply cannot put the brakes on a CEDH deck because it's not designed to. right?
Yeah.
If I wanted to be able to stop a CDH deck, I would need to be running these just really, really aggressive things that prevent people from even beginning to play out their strategy, which is fine for CDH, not so fine for casual.
So talk to me a little bit about the interaction impact.
Well, up here at the Tier 5 interaction impact, we have all the stops denial decks that actively try to lock down other players and or is always able to interact. It's built to reliably prevent others from playing their game, right? CDH level stacks is extremely, extremely oppressive. It's specifically made so that you don't get to do anything. Expect decks where interaction is woven into the main strategy. Think over 20 slots and no restraint using denial tactics of the highest impact, like mass land hate, card draw denial, mass land destruction, hate bears, oops all counters, chaos decks, recurring board wipe stacks, and other hard locks. Yeah, hard locks being the big one, right? Because once a hard lock has been achieved, that's the stacks deck equivalent of winning the game. And, you know, the rest is history, right? They can lock down the game at turn 4. It might not be until turn 11.
But the point is, it doesn't matter.
But there's
at turn 4,
there's
the game's
no way
over.
that the other players are going to be able to do anything between turns 5 and 11. That's just the stacks deck top decking into their win con.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. And that's so here's the thing. I get it. And we're going to actually go to cuz that's the scale, right?
That's
as far
the
as the different different
again,
ways that we're going.
This is the EDH multiverse from Beebles on TappedOut.
Yeah. There are two more factors here that I do want to touch on because I love it and I want to give all the credit to Beebles here because the one thing in there, and I wasn't sure if we should have started with this or we should end with it, and now I'm happy that we're ending with it.
Right.
The About This guide, this model provides an overview of the different ways one could interpret EDH. Mm-hmm. It is meant as a tool to assess in what interpretations of the format you would like to play. It is not meant for facilitating Rule Zero conversations, but for analysis outside of the play. The white lines marking the main format interpretations are a suggestion and a starting point. When using this model, please draw your own lines and define your own preferred ways to play EDH.
Right.
This is not a replacement for what are you doing.
Which is good because it's almost like we've begun to realize, right, that a power scale is not implicitly helpful for that.
It's abstract.
Rule Zero conversation. Abstract. Because the conversation is what we're about to go over here. How does your deck win? How fast does it win? Is it able to resist interaction? Is it able to stop other people from winning? How many tutors do you have? Et cetera, et cetera.
I love the idea that in like all of this boils down, right? And then the main chart is, hey, I'm playing high power casual, right? Yeah. So I'm playing to win, but not at any cost. Usually casually competitive games, and we're talking about turns 5 to 8, right? That totally makes sense. I get that, as opposed to everybody gets to try everything out. We'll see. Whatever happens, happens. Maybe turn 9 to 10 for a casual EDH, and then CEDH play to win. Anything that's legal and the format is tolerated, win at any cost, turns 1 to 4. Okay, if you just go in that level, am I going to be really frustrated if I'm playing against a 6.5? Or if I'm playing a 6.5 and somebody else is playing an 8? Well, we're kind of in the same tier, right? We're both hoping to win around, turn 5, 8, 9, 10. But turns 5 through 8 are when big things are going to be starting to happen. Like,
I think of turns 5 through 8 as like the mid to early late game because it seems to me quite rare that unless somebody just pops right off and nobody can stop them, that a deck at the power level that I'd like to play at would be consistently winning before turn 9. If somebody's consistently winning before turn 9, I'm seeing their deck as very fast and aggressive.
And see, I'm seeing a deck that, put it this way, if they win like instantly on turn 7 versus turn 7, they're setting up for the win. And it's like, oh, if they get to untap with all this stuff, they're probably going to win.
Yeah, I mean, at turn 7, you're starting to make big plays, but...
right. And that's why it's the crucial as opposed to This is the end point.
Right.
Kind of like in the other version of the stacks piece, where like a competitive stacks deck, not necessarily CDH, but a competitive stacks deck where it's like, I'm going to try and win. I might lock out the game on turn 4, but not actually win if everybody's going to insist we play everything out. I might not win until turn 30, but I won on turn 4. Yeah. I kind of see that the same way as like, I might win on turn 7, but the game goes on till turn 8 or 9.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm finding that I'm a lot more high power casual in most of my decks, according to this chart, which I do dig. I like there being something in between the, EDH and CEDH. Tolerant casual EDH is probably one of my favorite things I've heard of, because it's based off of all of this is its own power level from 1 to 8. But it's a lot of interaction, so it's a casual brew. But man, you have to have people playing with you that are going to be totally fine with you running 20 plus pieces
I think
of interaction.
That's something that we see really often if you look on public EDH forums, such as the EDH subreddit, where a lot of strife and friction comes from people having their strategy shut down, not necessarily by playing against a particularly high-powered deck, but by that deck being able to stop their strategy, or because that person writing has brought a deck that is stopping other people's strategies, even though that deck is not very powerful.
Right.
Just because you have the answers, it doesn't make your deck strong, but it does make it highly interactive, and so you kind of have its own family over here on the right side of the graph.
Yeah, and this is like I said, it's not a rule 0 replacement. But then, other opposite side of the corner here, Beebles talks about 10 other things to consider for setting house rules, which I do consider more of a rule 0 conversation, right? Because it's literally saying, are we okay with, and then a whole bunch of different things. Decks above, budget, blank. I'm less enthusiastic about that one in particular, but I also understand its place in our format. Reserve list cards or single cards over blank, same thing. Playtest cards or proxies, okay. Like, sometimes I'm going to play some playtest things. I'm going to play some, hey, can I play some proxies? You and I are very pro proxies in every way, but I also understand why some other people might have.
I wouldn't consider playtest cards and proxies to be even remotely the same thing. Some of those play like Sliv Mizzet. Yeah.
Right. I like having the conversation. Like, maybe those should have been 2 separate questions. But as far as hey, we're going to have a conversation. Are we cool with this? Are we cool with this? Are we cool with this? Mana positive, mana rocks apart from Soul Ring. That is something that is like really becoming a big talking point. As far as, as things get more hyper efficient and, hey, get rid of all of your 3 mana rocks, go down to 2, or things have to double, I can understand that being a power level conversation because it is a deck building conversation.
It's not a simple conversation though, right? Because
right.
Those rocks are really one of the only ways that some colors can keep up with green. Like, green can ramp so aggressive. No one's going to look like, wow, green is a 2 mana ramp spell or a 1 mana positive ramp spell. Like, wow, that's fast mana. No, it doesn't. Nobody thinks about it that way. That's just green doing what it does. But if you pull out your mana crypt in your white deck, that's a big problem because that's a fast mana rock. But that's how else are you going to keep up with it?
It's a fast mana rock and it's $150+. And it's like, well, yeah, but if I play,
that guy just played Carpet of Flowers.
Yeah, you know what I mean? There's a bunch of other things. And that's why, again, I get I like the idea of, hey, it's a conversation piece.
Right.
It's like, oh, yeah, I'm running a Mana Crypt in this deck. And I'm running another one. My brain's gone.
This is a good...
I'm running a couple, but it's because it's to get to this power.
This is a good segue, though, right? Because I have... Yeah. An Emrakul deck. We've done a deck tech on it on this show. And I would say that it is, somewhere in that focus to optimized area, but on the interaction scale, crucially, it's really low. If only because there are very few counterspells, board wipes, and spot removal and colorless. However, just because it has low interaction and is fragile doesn't mean it's a low power deck. And just because it's a high power deck doesn't mean that it's resistant to being messed with. So this is perfect for that, right? I have a deck that's potentially a 7 or an 8, but its interaction is like a 2 or a 3 maybe.
Yep.
And 3 is even saying 10 interaction. I doubt I have 10 interaction, but I know that I probably have 20 or 30 pieces of ramp.
Sure. And that makes sense. You know, I was going to say a lot of my decks are... I'm thinking about it real hard because I don't want to do the thing at the that you don't want to do at the table where it's, hey, this is not a CEDH deck. And it's not a CEDH deck because I'm not winning on turn 4. Right? But like I've got a lot of decks that are doing really scary, really powerful stuff at turn 5, 6. But my interaction, nothing.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of glass cannons, according to this, but just a tier below. Because optimize, win reliably, yes. Win cons that defeat all opponents at once are common, yes.
Hey, Mike, I'm going to wipe your board. Well, I lose.
Right, and maybe I've got again, we're looking into the low impact thing where it's like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can defend against it, or I can build it back up again real fast. I like this other question on here. Unconditional tutors and conditional tutors.
Right.
Okay. Like, tutors is a big conversation piece where it's, hey, if you're running a lot of tutors,
that's a more powerful deck.
Tutors, yeah, because you're trying to get specific things.
Your deck is becoming more consistent, and it's easier for you to find those integral pieces that allow you to assemble a win, or in the opposite direction, those integral toolbox pieces that allow you to shut down someone else's strategy, which is why I run probably not that many, but I do have at least a couple of tutors in the stacks there because I need to be able to find the piece to lock down the current strategy. I love
the next one being counterspells. And that's it. Not how many or what types or, CFC or anything like that, but just counterspells. But that's fair. Like, hey, if you're going to be playing against a deck where the entire theme of that deck is to counter as many things as possible, I would like to know that ahead of time so I can at least prepare for that kind of game. Not necessarily be like, oh, I'm going to play my deck that's uncounterable.
Also known as a permission deck.
Yeah, but I would like to know I'm playing a permission deck. Because at least then I can, say, okay, I'm going to have a lot of stuff that's just denied to me this game. Cool, I understand. As opposed to it just... Okay, I'm going to cast my commander on turn 2. No, you're not. Okay, no, I'm not. It's going to be one of those games. Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Specific banned or unbanned cards? Sure. I mean...
House rules are something else, really.
Yeah. And I get that on that one. Here's the one that I really wanted to get to, though. I win now cards. Alex, how many expropriates do you run?
Cards named expropriate? 0.
Yeah. How many cyclonic rifts do you run?
I have one in my stacks deck.
That's what I like that as a premise. Like, there are a couple of cards that are just like, I'm gonna win now, or I'm gonna stop everybody from winning.
Yeah.
And knowing if you're playing a deck that's running some of those cards does make sense to me, because maybe you just draw it randomly. Maybe you have conditional or unconditional tutors to go get it. Maybe a bunch of different maybes that lead into the fact of, hey, are you running this extremely powerful card that if you cast it, you're probably going to win the game? Because if so, there's at least a power level that you're hitting. And you have to kind of own up to that, right? You don't get to tell me that you're running a low power or jank deck with expropriate in it. Unless the whole point of the deck is to be terrible and cast expropriate. Like, I like that as a premise. And then you've got your game-ending combos of, 2 or less cards, which if you have a game-ending combo of 1 card, that's... I don't know how you do that. But cool. And then game-ending combos of 3 or more cards, just as far as like, hey, how many ways can you go infinite with this deck? How many ways can you do this thing that just wins? I don't mind that as part of the Rule 0 discussion. as or house rules that you're making or whatever. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing to look at when you're talking about infinite combos is, of course, the number of cards is important, but it's really more about how that exists as a function of how easy or difficult it is to assemble that combo, right? Because a 2-card combo, if you have a lot of tutors, is very easy to assemble. You're probably going to be able to get it within a few turns. You just find a few tutors, or maybe you top deck into it. If you're running a 2-card combo and you have 0 tutors, for example, my Nin deck has a couple of these, like Leveler and Labman or Jace. Those combos are in there, but I have 0 way to find them.
Right.
I have to deck into them. And so because of that, I typically don't find those combos until like turn 12 or later.
Right. And that's the point. Like that's the conversation. Because if I just ask you the question, how many game-ending combos do you have of 2 cards? Okay, how many combos do you have of 3 or more cards? And you tell me I have 2 game enders with 2 cards, and I have 3 game enders with 3 or more cards. Well, that doesn't
sounds
mean...
scary.
It sounds scary, because it's like, wait, you have 5 combos in this deck? But then you go through all the other pieces, and it's like, I don't have a way to tutor for them. I'm not going to try and find them. If I get them, I get them. And they only combo in this way, or this way. Right? That's 2 things that are both true that are totally separate from each other in the context of how powerful is your deck. Right? That's why I specifically used Deadeye Navigator before, because it is a infamous card for being able to combo with things, and it can combo with a lot of different stuff. So if I have one go find a creature tutor versus a whole bunch of go find a Deadeye Navigator and win the game, even if I've got 10 things to combo with it in my deck, if my deck is built to do one thing, or if it's built to interact with a thing if I get it, huge difference.
The other important thing to think about here is, especially when you were asking, like, what even is a 1-card combo? A lot of the time when you're thinking about a combo, you're also thinking about how that relates to your commander, right? Because you almost always have access to your commander, at least from the beginning of the game. You should have good access to it. And if one of your combos is, say, a 2-card combo and one of those cards is your commander, it's almost like that's a 1-card combo, because you only need to find 1 card. So a 2-card combo where one of the cards is your commander, I would say is a very dangerous combo, very powerful.
Gotcha. Niv Mizzet, and Curiosity. Yeah. Okay, got it.
You'll find a lot of cards like that.
That makes sense. Okay, that checks out then. All right, so again, overall, I really like it as a thought exercise, right? It's made me look at a lot of my decks differently. It made me think that most of my decks are in a high power casual EDH scale according to this chart. And I didn't have a way to think about them other than, saying like, most of my decks are going to try and do the winning play. Maybe not win the game, but the winning play in those like 6 to 8 turn range. Maybe they're faster if I'm doing the group hug stuff and I'm trying to get everybody into their win conditions like an extra turn or 2 early.
Right.
But I kind of like that as a principle. High power casual. I don't know.
Which is, that's why this extra access, the interaction access, is so important, because if you told me like, hey, my deck's consistently winning by turn 6 or trying to win by turn 6, I'd be like, wow, that's a really strong deck. But then you say, oh, I have 1 spot removal, 0 counter spells, and 0 board wipes. Like, oh, okay.
Right. And then you and I get into the conversation of, oh, don't worry. If we were just going off of this like it was gospel, and I'm not doing that to Beebles. Beebles literally says, hey,
don't use this for
way of looking
0.
at it.
Yeah.
And I love what they've done, and I love the explanation there. This is a really cool chart.
It looks
a really
cool,
good
too.
Thought piece. I love the idea that we're like, hey, I have a high power, low impact reactive deck. Right? So it's like, okay, I'm like a 7 or an 8 in the power level, but don't worry, I've got like a couple of emergency cards. And you and I hear that, and it's like, okay, cool, a couple of emergency cards, like 3 or 4. And then there's also the idea of up to 10. And it's like, well, wait a second.
Yeah, I'm really low interaction. I only run 10 counterspells. Like, oh my god.
No. Sorcery speed.
10 sorcery speed counterspells. Yeah.
That would, man.
I created a custom card one time. It got shut down. Of course, like all my custom cards got shut down. But it was just a really simple design. It was 0 mana, counter target spell, sorcery speed.
Nice.
I thought it was quite elegant. They thought that was really stupid. But you know.
Well, I mean, listen, 2 things can be right at the same time.
It can be elegant and stupid.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what a savant is, right? Alex, if anybody wanted to ask you about the be-all, end-all power level of their decks and submit them to you so you could tell them exactly what their deck power level was. Oh, boy,
what are you signing me up for?
And, hey, can you please tell me if this is a 7.5 or an 8.2? Oh, my God,
don't do this, guys.
How would they interact with you?
You are free to hit me up on Twitter. I don't know if I'm going to be rating the power level of your deck. My goodness. It's at Lappermedic, Lappermedic. What I thought would be more appropriate to talk about is we've spoken a lot about combos, 2-card and 3-card combos, about combos of various power levels, locking out the game, being more or less powerful, more or less consistent. If combos interest you, maybe you don't know a lot about them, or maybe you're super into them, you can check out my website, commanderspellbook.com, which is indexing all the combos in EDH that we can find. We're up to 11,000 combos. Why don't you type in your favorite commander and see what comes up?
Thank you for listening to the podcast, everybody. You can follow us on Twitter at EDH_social. You can also follow the show notes to get into our Discord channel and be able to talk with us about things like this. This was something that Lapper put up in the Discord, and frankly, we get a lot of our subjects and a lot of our topics from people in there.
Our members are great.
And it's cozy, and it's nice, and frankly, we love all the people in there.
We do.
Wouldn't mind having more.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, what are you doing? Come on in. Have a conversation with us. We do a lot of talking about rules. We do a lot of talking about different card interactions, weird cards that we haven't seen, talking about deck lists, and thankfully, not a whole lot of, hey, everybody tell me what power level this card is, because you're going to get 10 people different answer with 10 different numbers.
I mean, individual cards...
Sure.
On a power scale, it makes little sense. Anyway, that's off the point. We love talking with our listeners. It is very cozy because we don't have a lot of listeners, but that's okay. We love everybody who we have in there. If you're listening to us right now and you're not in that Discord channel, we'd love to have you.
What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Seriously,
what are you doing with your life?
Show us that one card that we've never heard of. Impress everybody in the room. Talk to us about what you want us to make an episode about. Show us your weird deck. Maybe we do a deck check about it. Maybe you made a piece of magic content, like you wrote an article or something. We'd love to talk with you about it.
Sharing is caring. You know what? I don't even have anything to add to that. So until next time, we'll talk to you soon.